Alexey Muraviev, he's an associate professor of national security at Curtin University, an expert in Russian analysis, and joins me live now. Alexey, thanks for your time. While the summit's been held in Bali, the focus in large part has been on Eastern Europe, particularly that missile strike that hit Poland. This reaction now from NATO and Poland suggesting it looks like it was a Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile. Does that assessment make sense to you?
Well, to some extent it does, because, first of all, the Ukrainians find themselves in an increasingly difficult position trying to counter Russia's ongoing air missile offensive, and certainly they're relying on pretty outdated capabilities to counter that. And whatever the injection is coming from Western military supplies with regards to providing them with targeted air defense, it doesn't seem to actually do anything to stop the Russian onslaught in this sense. Secondly, there is also an element of truth that NATO, when it comes to NATO's response and even Polish response to this incident, that NATO remains hesitant of trying to engage Russia in any way, and is trying to avoid the escalation or direct escalation with Russia as much as it can. I mean, bearing in mind that Poland is probably one of the most committed countries of the NATO bloc towards the war in Ukraine. It represents a bridgehead through which the bulk of the military supplies come to Ukraine. There are thousands of Polish volunteers who fight alongside the Ukrainians. They harbor refugees, they provide them with political support, and the list goes on. Yet, the Polish were very cautious on how they treated this incident, which also demonstrates that when it comes to rhetoric, when it comes to indirect support, that's one thing. But when it comes to the prospect of a direct escalation with Russia, which continues to remain a major military power and a nuclear superpower, this is something different. So I think, to me, the West reaction to this missile incident is quite symptomatic and telling with regards how it wants to pursue this conflict with Russia.
When you look at the risk of the rest of Europe being drawn in, though, via, say, a NATO member like Poland, that potential would have disastrous, dire consequences if that were to eventuate, wouldn't it?
Well, it would. And in fact, we can already argue that Europe is indirectly drawn into the conflict. It's no longer a fight between Russia and Ukraine. It's a fight between Russia and NATO-backed Ukraine. So there are a lot of European assets that already engaged in confronting Russia, and that also partially explains why the war keeps going for nearly 10 months now. But certainly there is a risk that if something goes wrong and if something gets miscalculated, that the more of Europe will become directly involved in the confrontation. Having said that, there are also a bit of skepticism going on that even if Russia is to exercise surgical strikes against Poland, which in fact was entertained in Moscow because, as I said, Poland represents a massive logistical enabler in terms of bringing NATO supplies into the Ukraine. And certainly the Russian media and Russian defense experts kept entertaining the possibility that perhaps one of ways how to stop this injection of Western supplied military resources coming into Ukraine is to perhaps send a clear warning to the Poles that this is not going to be tolerated. And certainly they entertain this along the lines that, yes, even if we'll hit one or two Polish military airfields, whether NATO would actually go as far as activating Article 5. And activating Article 5 doesn't necessarily mean that NATO will stand for Poland, or it will just send yet another massive warning to the Russians and come short of direct confrontation. So I think we're sort of in the sphere of lots of ambiguity right now.
Alexey Muraviev, I read your analysis on skynews.com.au, our website, where you make contributions, including this explanation of the retreat from Kherson. You said it makes sense in military strategy to help the Russian forces resupply, reorganise, but in a political sense, it is really not good for Putin.
No, it's not. I mean, Putin's strategy in fighting this war is very clear. He wants to buy time. He wants to drain Ukraine. He wants to drain the West. He wants to drain the West militarily because there are growing problems in how much it can continue to supply Ukraine. Quite a few Western militaries now facing the reality that they need to start replenishing their arsenals. He wants to drain the West, not so much economically, but emotionally, that the war fatigue, the war syndrome will start taking turn. Winter is coming in Europe, and the Europeans will start being preoccupied when trying to keep themselves warm and with power rather than thinking of Ukraine. And obviously, you know, the elections are coming in Russia in 2024. The elections are coming in the United States in 2024, also in Ukraine. So 2024 would be symbolic year. However, this long-term strategy of sit and wait and fight the war at frog steps would not necessarily go down well, and already is not going down well with the Russians for a number of reasons. First of all, Putin managed to militarize the Russian minds. He sold the idea that Russia is there to win, not to sit there and fight forever. Secondly, after the first phase, which was marked by pretty swift advances into the Ukrainian territory, this war turned its tide, and the Russians began asking questions. Well, how come the world's second military cannot really take over and win over Ukraine militarily? Then comes the mobilization, which pulled about 300,000 skilled workers from the Russian workforce. Plus, in addition to, now someone says 700,000 that fled the country. And that represents a massive pool of human resources that's been taken out of the Russian economy. The taxpayers that no longer contribute to the funding of the Russian state. So the Russians effectively saying, well, we cannot sit and wait forever until you figure out your game. So, and they're not interested in the logic of military strategy. They want victories because this is what Putin promised them, and so far hasn't been delivered. And also the wall of silence coming from the Kremlin is actually does more damage to Putin and his team than anything else.
Yep, indeed. It's not looking good for him heading into winter as well. Alexey Muraviev, Associate Professor at National Security in Curtin University, thank you very much. Appreciate your analysis.